Morning, everyone. This is Sue Dieters. I am your host today. And I also have Suzanne Watson on the phone with us. She is going to be monitoring any questions that you have. Our discussion topic today is accounts payable, which is one of my favorite modules. That's where the money is. And we are going to be highlighting a few features in the setup options and also taking a deep dive look into vendor maintenance. We will also be reviewing a few types of transactions that you can do in the AP module, which you may or may not be aware of. Before we start, I'm sure, you just all heard that you are in listen-only mode. Please feel free, if you have any questions, to go ahead and type it into the question box. Suzanne's going to be monitoring them for us. And we are also recording this session. I have a lot of topics this morning, so I'm going to be talking as fast as I possibly can to get all the information in for you. So if I'm talking a little bit too fast, feel free. In a couple of days, we're going to have the video out on the website, and take a listen to it again if you miss anything or you can't take notes fast enough. And also, never hesitate to give us a call or an email, and we'll answer a question for you. All right, so let's get started. The first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to flip our screen here and get you over to our Sage 100 screen. And I'm going to click on Accounts Payable. Now, for many of you, you were not there when your companies purchased Sage, or things have changed over the years. So that's why we're doing these series. And today, like I said, we're going to start with our setup options. So let's go to Accounts Payable Setup and Accounts Payable Options. Now, in our option screen, we're going to start here with the main tab. The first item that I wanted to talk about was the accounts payable divisions. Now, what is that? Well, what that does is it gives you a 2-digit prefix in front of your vendor number. Now, that prefix, that division code, you'll notice over here we also have division maintenance in our setup option, but that is what controls what general ledger account number that your AP posts to. So if you're in a situation where you have multiple divisions and you have multiple AP accounts, that is how you control how they are posted to your general ledger. The second item I wanted to talk about here is our aging categories. The system defaults to 30, 60, 90, but you can change these to whatever you want. When you print an aging report, that is the aging categories that the report is going to use. So feel free to change those if you would like to. Now, right here in this default invoice display, I've got mine set to descending invoice date. Your choices are invoice number, ascending invoice date, or descending invoice date. Now, the reason why I like to choose descending invoice date is because what it does is it puts your newest invoices, unpaid invoices at the top. So if you're going into vendor maintenance and you're having to hit scroll to get down to your invoices, this is what's controlling it. So a lot of you are saying, what is she talking about? Well, let's go ahead and pop open a vendor maintenance window here, and you're going to see in the invoices tab, that is how they're going to be displayed. So that's where I'm talking about if you have to scroll, okay? So if your paid ones are at the top, your unpaid ones are at the bottom, come in here and change this to descending invoice date. Now, I didn't mention this before, but we're not going to go over every field. We're just going to highlight the few fields that I think are pretty important as we go through these setup options. So let's look over here at these fiscal period, the current fiscal year, and a current period. Yes, you do need to do period end. Every module has its own period end, and we highly recommend that you do period end processing for each module once you're ready to close for the month. Why? Why do you want to do period end? Because for one, it helps people not post to prior closed periods. That happens sometimes. We make mistakes. We have invoices that come in late, so we want to get them into that period. But in our ledger, if we've already technically, we've printed our financials, we don't want people to go to the prior period. We definitely want to do period end in these modules to help prevent people from going there. It also does some functionality of how long we've held it to retain history, and it purges some of the invoices and other things within the module properly is if you're closing your period ends. 1099s. 1099s are really important for a lot of people. The system does do 3 different types of 1099s: miscellaneous, interest, and dividends. So if you are doing 1099s, definitely turn this on. Sage integrates with a product called Atrix, and Atrix can not only print your 1099s for you, but you can also have them e-file or send to your vendors for a nominal fee those 1099s at the end of the year. Now I want to direct your eyes down to this enable wire transfers. I always turn this on. Now what are wire transfers? They are not ACHs. These are not your payments to your vendors for ACHs. As you see in tab number 6, we actually have an ACH setup for that. What is this? This is where these are the auto drafts that come out of your bank account that you have agreed to pay someone every month. Maybe it's a loan payment or something of that nature, and it drafts out of your account. Right now, the majority of us are putting them in as manual checks, and you're having to create fake check numbers for it. But if you use this enable wire transfers, which we're going to show today, it's a really neat feature of how to get those into your system without having to make up new check numbers for them. So let's now pop over to the additional tab. Okay, 2 options here. Invoice register in detail and manual check payment registers in detail. Yes, I like those turned on. And we turn those on because this is what the information that posts over to the general ledger. So in other words, if I'm going to post an invoice register in detail, my expense is going to go over with the vendor number and the invoice number. Or you'll notice down here you can have multiple options as far as what posts over there. But you want that over there. You want to look at your utilities account and see which vendors that you were paying and for the amount. Now this third one, check and electronic payment register in detail. I usually turn that off. We recommend that we turn that off. Why? Because it will post every check to your cash account. So it makes for a very large general ledger. So it's up to you. If you like to see those individual checks in there, go right ahead and do that. But I usually turn that off. On our right-hand side here, days to retain paid invoices. By default, I believe the system comes with 99. I recommend 999. That is the maximum that you can do. Now, what does that mean? Once again, I'm going to go ahead and pop up our vendor maintenance screen here. That is the invoices that are displayed on the Invoices tab, 999 days. So when you're doing your period end, if it's 1,000 days old, it's going to come off of the screen. Do they go away forever? No, they do not, because we actually have an invoice history file that retains those invoices, even though they're not showing on that invoice tab. Whole different file. So don't worry about losing any information, okay? I'm going to click on the Entry tab now, and we're going to talk about batch processing. If you do batch processing, you can enable these. Oh, I actually have an invoice data entry in progress, so I cannot enable that right at this point. But you can enable these. So if you have multiple people entering invoices or multiple people entering manual checks at the same time, everybody can have their own batch. Now, there is a feature down here called Enable Expense Distribution Tables. Sage added this feature to the system several years ago, and I'll be honest with you. I thought it was a great feature when they added it, but it was a little shy of being perfect. What does it do? Well, if you have invoices that every time you get an invoice, it always gets distributed to these 7 GL account numbers or these 20 GL account numbers or whatever, you can actually set a table up that and name it. Maybe it's a utility that has to be distributed against multiple departments, and you set the table up and the distribution, either percentages or you can put in the amount when you actually enter the invoice. The piece that was short, the piece that made it not perfect, was you couldn't tie that table to the vendor. Well, guess what? In the next release of Sage 100, they have added that piece. So now, in my opinion, this has become a perfect feature. So in vendor maintenance, you will be able to put the table name in there that's associated with all those GL account numbers. So when you enter invoices, those GL account numbers will pop up for you. So that's going to be in the newer release of the Sage 100. Great news. Over here, default bank code. Keep in mind that you can have up to 36 bank codes. And this default bank code is the one that shows when you are getting ready to enter your checks or enter your manual checks. So if you've changed your bank and you're using a different bank code, but this old one keeps popping up, this is why. Come into this default bank code and put it to your next newest bank code. All right, now let's go to our printing tab here. Two things up here at the top: print GL distribution on your check and electronic payment register, and print the GL account description. You can do a partial, full, or none at all. What this is used for is a lot of us is once we do print those checks and we get our check register, we have to hand it off to management, and they want to look at not only what you're paying, but they want to see what it was expensed to. So if you want your GL account number on your check register, this is where you turn it on. I'm also going to look over here at this history tab. Okay. Oh, I almost forgot. Let's pop back over to printing. Down here at the bottom, this is a feature that most people are not aware of. If you have multi-companies, you can actually print an aged invoice report for multiple companies. You can turn this on. What does this do? Well, let's say we have management that says, you know, you printed me the aging for this company, you printed me the aging for that company, but I only want to see one report. Well, if you turn this on, you can definitely do that. So what I have done is I have right here, I have created an aged invoice report, and I called it multi. I created it off our standard report. And you'll notice down here at the bottom, I have two company codes, my ABC and my EEC. So I'm going to hit preview. When I preview this report, what you're going to see on it is, okay, here's my airway property for my company code ABC, and here's some more ABC, another vendor for ABC. But down here, oh, here's my concrete company for EEC. So what this report does is it actually combines your company's aging into one report. Pretty cool, huh? I can't believe I almost forgot to show that to you. Okay, so now let's pop over to the history tab. And what do I want to talk about here? First of all, yes, you want to turn this invoice payment history on. We want to track our detailed invoices, and we want to retain our comment lines. If I put a comment on an invoice, I want to know why. And so what that does for you, let's go ahead and bring vendor maintenance back up. If I click my down arrow, you see my invoice inquiry. That's that history file. So if you turn that on, you will always be able to go and find those invoices, okay? Also over here on your purchase history, the system comes with a default of 2 years. You can have up to 99. I think that's a little more than we all need. 7, 10, you know, whatever feels good for you. Maybe you want to do 7. Same thing with your 1099 payment history here. So where do you see that? What does that pertain to? Well, on our history tabs, and we click our down arrows, that tells us how many years we're going to be able to see on our history and summary tabs. That's what that is for, okay? Now, let me go ahead and close out of that. Okay, let's go to our ACHs. This is where you are doing ACH. So Sage 100 can actually produce that NACHA file that your bank requests that you send. You can actually pay your ACHs in the same check run that you're doing actual physical checks and create the file that you upload to the bank. You first have to enable it in here, and you have to give it a place on your network where you are going to put your ACH file, and then you will pull that into upload that into your bank. Great feature. One thing I do recommend is print your vendor remittance advices. Those are like the checks, but they're the remittance advices. And you can set it up with Paperless Office so that your vendors will receive those via email. Make things a little bit easier for you. Alrighty, so let's close our setup options and let's go back to main. And we're going to go into vendor maintenance here. Alrighty, I'm going to pull up Airway Property again. I believe I closed him out. You guys know how to enter addresses. I don't need to go over that with you. But let's talk about what a credit card vendor is. A credit card vendor is your Amex, your Visa, your MasterCard. In Sage, what you can do is set up your credit card vendors, and you can transfer invoices from your other vendors to your credit card vendors. So let's say, for instance, you have purchased a computer from your other vendor, and you pay via credit card, but you want to transfer that invoice to the credit card vendor. So when the statement comes in, that invoice is on the statement. However, you still want to see that purchase on the originating vendor because you want to know how much you spent with that vendor each month or each year or whatever. And that's what a credit card vendor does for you, is it will hold those invoices if you choose to transfer them over. Electronic payment. You have to click this checkbox in order to do those ACHs. Once you click that, when you hit your More button up here, you're going to see electronic payment. So I'm going to click on that, and you'll notice I can put in their bank code, the routing number, what type of account it is. But their pre-note has to be approved in order for them to start receiving those ACHs. So make sure you get those in here, get the pre-notes approved. They will get a physical check until that pre-note is approved. Also, I wanted to talk about this paperless button here. As most of you know, paperless is included with the system now. It's a really cool feature. If you click the down arrow here, I can choose AP check, and I've said, okay, I may want to print it and email it, or I may want to take my print off, but if I'm going to email it, who am I going to email it to? Well, I have told the system to use the vendor email address, that is this one here, as the person that gets the email. If I also need to email this to someone else, so maybe Sarah Smith gets a email too, what I can do is over here in my recipient, I can do it as a to, or I can do it as a CC or a BCC. So that's actually a really cool feature. It's new. That's brand new, so that you can actually add that if you have multiple people that this email needs to go to. I'm not going to go ahead and save my changes at this point. All righty, let's jump to the additional tab here, and let's talk about vendor status. You have 3 statuses: active, inactive, or temporary. Keep in mind that if you make a vendor inactive, then the users will no longer be able to select that vendor in order to process invoices for them. You can also, there's security options so that those inactive vendors do not show on your vendor list when you go to do a lookup list. The GL account number right here is a default GL account number used when you enter invoices. I recommend that you only enter a GL account number into this field if this is for a non-purchase order vendor. So keep in mind, when you have purchase order integrated with this system, any POs that you enter, normally you're going to enter the invoice through receipt of invoice in the purchase order module. So it's the inventory item that controls the GL account number, so this GL account number doesn't matter. So if this is a utility or rent or a lease or whatever, go ahead and put a GL account number in there because it saves you time to, when you're keying, it automatically brings that account number up. On the right-hand side, you're going to see this use PO receipt of invoice entry for this vendor. If your users just can't get it, or you just want to make sure that they do get it, you can click on this box here, and they can't put an invoice in through AP invoice data entry for this vendor. They have to put it in through the purchase order module. So it's a safety net for you. In your 1099 forms, if you have a vendor that is a 1099, you can set it up as a business or individual, and once again, choose whether it's a miscellaneous interest or dividend vendor. Go ahead and put in their federal ID number. And what you're going to notice when I do that, the default box number below is 1. And what happens is a lot of times when we set up these 1099 vendors, people forget to change it from 1. Now, in my case, this is a rental vendor, but in most cases, this box should be 7. So make sure that whoever sets up the vendors puts the correct box number in here if they're a 1099 vendor. If you're in the middle of the year or somebody actually did accidentally set up the wrong box number, once you click on your 1099 history here, it goes into our 1099 payment history panel, and I can actually change and put the dollar amount where I need it to be. This is also helpful if we started in the middle of the year and we don't have information on the vendor, or they didn't tell us until the middle of the year that we need, that they were a 1099 vendor. Okay, the statistics, the summary, the history, we all get that. We understand that. Let's talk about the invoices tab here. So I love this tab. I love the dual screens on here. What you can do with these grids is if you select an invoice, I can see on the top grid is my invoice information, but my bottom grid is more detailed information about it. For one, I'm going to pay attention to this transaction date down here. I know that this invoice was dated or was posted on 5/31. And do pardon my test data here is in the year 2020, but my invoice was posted on 5/31, and my invoice date is 5/30. I do usually, most often, want to have those the invoice date and the posting date within the same period. If you don't, when you try to run your aging report, it may not quite balance the way that you think it should. You will also see my second line here is my payment for that invoice. So it shows me that that was also posted on 5/31, and this was the check number for the invoice. I have a search button up here. So if I click on that search button, these are the different ways that I can search for an invoice. So if I have a lot of invoices out there, maybe I'm looking for a specific invoice balance or a specific invoice date, I can search on that criteria. Also, we have a drill down button right here. Now you can double click on the invoice, or you can just click on your drill down button. The great feature of this is I can see where this invoice now originated. I know it came from the purchase order module. This is my purchase order number. I can see my totals. I can go to my lines. These are the items that were purchased on that purchase order, and this is, what I did receive in and the amount that I received in. And I can also see that there was a payment on here. So this is the check that showed on the other screen. And once again, if I drill down on that check, I can see that multiple invoices were paid on this check. So that's kind of a great feature of being able to drill without having to leave my screen. Okay, so now I want to run over here to the checks tab. And I want you to pay attention to the fact that I have multiple bank codes going on here. I'm using bank code A and I'm using bank code D. And I have different types of check numbers and different check types. Well, one of the ones I want to highlight here is this credit card. Remember I said I can transfer invoices to my credit card vendor. Well, I have done so with that, and that's what this is telling me, and my check number starts with the letter C. Over here to the right, I have a transfer information button. If I click on that, it tells me that I transferred it to my Amex, and this was the invoice date, and this is the amount that I transferred. So that's really nice that I can be able to see that. The other options that we have here are these electronic payments. So these are my ACHs here, okay? And I know that because it has the letter E. And if, let's say, for instance, a vendor said that they didn't get their remittance advice, you'll notice I just clicked on my paperless button right there, and it opened up my paperless viewer. And at this point, I could highlight this, click on my email button, and I can email this directly to that vendor. So once again, great feature of being able to get to that data without having to try to find it out on the drive somewhere. Okay, now that's vendor maintenance. So let's talk about invoice data entry a little bit. As we talked about before, entering invoices is pretty simple. There's a few buttons that I want to talk about in here. First of all, you have your lookup list. The lookup list gives you a listing of every vendor that you have available. The flashlight will show you any unposted invoices. Remember when I was in setup options and I tried to make a change and I had an unposted invoice out here. So these are unposted invoices. A lot of times we get confused when we're in here and we think, oh, I try to click on this one, but these are unposted. These are batches that we started, but we have not posted yet. So let's go ahead and we're going to choose a vendor. And I want you to note this vendor number here. It's a blue hyperlink to vendor maintenance. So now I can come in here and I can see what I need to see about this vendor. One thing you're going to notice is Sue accidentally entered this invoice twice. I entered it with characters in front of it and no characters. So I need to get one of those out. I made a mistake. So what we're going to talk about is how to adjust an invoice. So I'm going to come in here and I'm going to enter that invoice number that I want to adjust. So entered the invoice number, and now it opened the Adjust Invoice on File screen. Now there are three things that I can do in this screen. I can hold payment for this invoice. So if I'm upset about this invoice or I need to talk to the vendor, I can change that flag, okay? Or I can tell the system to produce a separate check. So maybe this invoice has to be on its own check all by itself. Or I can adjust it. So once I click on Adjust, you'll notice that I have an invoice balance here, and I want to adjust the whole thing out. So I'm going to put the entire amount in as a negative, and then I'm going to click on my Lines tab. Now, at this point, what it did is it pulled the GL account number that I had set up in vendor maintenance for this vendor. If that is not the correct GL account number, I can change it. I can edit that GL account number and put in the one that I want. All right, so I'm going to go ahead and accept that. I'm not going to post this right now. I'm just going to exit out, and we'll post that later. But that is how you adjust an on-file invoice, okay? Now let's talk a little bit about manual check and payment entry. When you come in here and you have that wire transfer turned on, now when I click the down arrow, you'll notice that I have other options. So I'm going to go ahead and click on wire transfer, and I want you to watch the check number field. When I click the check number field, it puts a W in front of it, and it puts a unique number there. So gone are the days of like, okay, you know, what do I make my wire transfer numbers? And I have to keep a list of numbers so I don't accidentally use a real number for it. But I'm going to put in the transfer amount, and then I am going to select the vendor, and we're going to do UPS on this. And if you have a comment, you can put a comment in. And if you have a wire transfer number, you can put a wire transfer number in. If you don't, you know, you can use the date or, whenever it hit the bank or however you want to do it. I'm going to go to the Lines tab, and you can, if the invoice, if you actually have an invoice on file, you can pay it this way. But in most cases, if you're doing a wire transfer, it's because this was deducted out of your account. So I'm going to go ahead. What I'm going to use is my GL distribution button here. So I'm going to go ahead and click that, and it will automatically bring up my GL distribution screen. And this is where I can choose a different GL account number. Also want you to note that the description for my GL account number is on this bottom grid. Now that kind of drives me a little bit crazy, so I'm going to bring that up there, and that's going to stay up there for me going forward. So anything you see on a bottom grid, you can always move up to your top grid, and vice versa. If it's on the top grid and you don't want to see it, just move it down to the bottom grid, get it out of your way. All right, so now I'm going to go ahead and accept that. So that's how you do a so-called wire transfer. Now let's talk about, this is actually one of my favorite features, quick print. A lot of us don't even know it's there. So what is a quick print? Well, let's talk about your functionality of what normally happens if somebody comes to you and says, hey, I need a check right away. Well, is the invoice in the system? No. Here, it's not in the system yet. Or maybe it is in the system, but I need a check right away. Well, what you can do, what most people do is if they have if the invoice isn't in the system, they go into invoice data entry, they enter the invoice and they post it, and they go into invoice payment selection, and then they go into check printing and they select their invoice, and they've printed their check, right? Well, you can do all of that right from here. So if I click the quick print button, it changes my check number to asterisk PRNT asterisk. So the system now knows that it's going to print a check. And then you put in the dollar amount of the check that you need to write, and you select the vendor. So this is going to happen to be Anders Auto Repair. And I'm going to go to my Lines tab. Now, if the invoice is on file, if we've already posted the invoice, then you just click on this button here, the Select Invoices button. If you don't want to create an invoice, you can click on your GL distribution and post it to a GL distribution, or you can enter that invoice that you need to pay. Now, once I put the invoice number in, it's going to prompt me, is this a new invoice? And the answer is, well, yes, it is. And then it will automatically distribute it to the expense account that I have in my vendor. If I don't have one in the vendor, it's going to pop up with this screen for me, okay? Once I click accept, which I'm going to do, and it goes into a check printing screen, and I'm going to click on print. I'm going to print my check here. Now you're going to hear that check printing in my background because I am physically printing the check, and I'm going to go ahead and click OK. System's going to prompt me to remove my checks from the printer and replace them with plain paper, and I'm going to hit OK. Now, what has just happened? Well, I printed the check, but the boss is standing over my shoulder, and he's making me nervous, so I put the checks in upside down. So I've ruined the check, and I got to do it again. I got to print that check again. So what can you do to still make it fast and easy? Well, I'm going to select this check, and I'm going to click on this print button again, and now you'll notice the name of it has changed. It says reprint check. Aha! So we're going to click on that button, and it's saying, are you going to reprint using the same check number? Now, let's say I accidentally had white paper in and forgot to put my checks in, then I would say, yeah, I'm doing that. But I'm going to say no because I printed on the back of a real check, so I can't use that check. So after reprinting, do you want to void this check or delete the check number? Well, I want to void it, okay? The reason why I want to void it is because I did ruin that check. So I'm going to hit void, and now you'll notice that the system went up to check number 17, and I'm going to hit print again. So now it is going to physically print that check for me. And I'm going to click OK. And I'm going to remove the checks from my printer. So now I am done printing checks. So now I need to print my check register. So remember, I've got one of my wire transfers in there. I've got a void check in there, and I have my new quick print check. Now I can click this little printer right here, or I can come over here and click on the manual check and payment register. But I like shortcuts, so I'm going to click on this. And I'm going to go ahead and click my print button. I do have paperless turned on, so we should get a register to our screen here. And I'm going to pull it over, hopefully, to your window. And let's make this a little bigger. And we have our voided check. We have our new check. And we also have our wire transfer. So that's how you can quick print a check and how to put wire transfers in. A lot of people don't know that that exists, but it's a great feature of the system. I'm going to go ahead and update that. All righty, and once again, we're going to do the daily transaction register. We always want to print our daily transaction registers because remember that first posting is a posting that affects accounts payable. The second posting, the daily transaction register here, is what hits the general ledger. So we always want to make sure that we post that daily transaction register. I'm going to pop us back to my other screen here because we're a little bit past our 30 minutes. But this is our contact information here. If you have any questions about what we talked about today or want to take a little bit deeper dive, feel free to contact us. I do not see any questions. I haven't heard anything. Yep, no questions out here. So once again, thank you for attending today. We appreciate you spending the time with us. And if you have anything you'd like to know more about, feel free to give us a shout out and we'll help you out. Thank you all. Appreciate you and have a great day. Bye for now.